Hi everybody, this is Laszlo Vasco with Micro Adventures. Today we'll continue on our journey looking at the past 130 years of cameras being used in action. So on the first episode we looked at the invention of paper-backed film, like 120 film, that enabled cameras to become a lot more smaller and portable in the 1910s and basically before World War II. They were the preeminent way of taking photography. And how, that was invented by the Boston Camera Company up here in Boston and acquired by the American Camera Company. Anyway, take a look at my first episode, eventually being acquired by Kodak, who became, of course, the largest supplier of roll film itself. But today we'll take a look at another company called Ansco that had a key role in the invention of a flexible film and roll film itself, as well as a number of pretty neat, innovative cameras that they've manufactured. I actually think they're the underdog of the camera industry. They certainly don't really get the recognition, I believe. And one of the reasons I was attracted to collecting their equipment. So flexible film itself was invented by and patented by Dr. Hannibal Goodwin in New Jersey. And correspondingly, that patent was acquired by Anthony and Scoville, who merged to form Ansco around 1900. Unfortunate for them, Kodak and George Eastman decided to just ignore the patent and manufacture roll film themselves, either copying the patent or just using their own internal research, because they were working on this process as well. And a subsequent lawsuit which resolved in favor of Ansco, but it took till 1905 for that to resolve, and the penalties were not nearly as harsh as the damage that was already done to Ansco's business and the lack of business and market share that they unfortunately couldn't get because of the shenanigans of Kodak. So another reason, again, why I think they're the underdog, historically speaking, in the history of cameras. But with that said, they also came out with a number of pretty neat cameras. And if you have not seen my 1917 enthusiast video, please take a look at that, where I cover the Ansco Vest 02 camera. And this one is one of these early folding cameras from 1917, the year the United States entered World War I. And so I managed to go and take a look at and take pictures with this of some vintage aircraft from the same era. So again, suggest for you to check out that video where I look at this camera in more detail. But I found it to be remarkably easy to use and remarkably great pictures that it took. So moving on then from 1917 to 1924, Ansco came out and surprised the industry with this particular guy, the Ansco 1A Automatic. And the unique feature of this camera is that instead of hand winding the film, it featured a clockwork mechanism. So hence the weird, asymmetrical positioning of the camera within this larger box, because it had a clockwork mechanism in it. You wound it up and then you click this lever, which then subsequently wound the film to the next one. So I've figured out a way to load 120 film in it. This used instead of a 2 1/4 width, it used film that was 2 1/2 width, and you're able to get adapters. I'll cover this in a little bit more detail, but I was able to fit 120 film in this. I'm waiting for it to be developed, and I'll cover this in a separate episode in more detail, and the unique features, which there were additional ones as well, not just the automatic winding of this camera. But very innovative. So prior to this, there were, and the reason I'm saying it was the first, sort of the first camera that came out with this automatic motor wind, is that prior to it, of course, 35 millimeter was already being used in cinema cameras, where, of course, they were motorized in a sense, winding to the next frame. And people did start to create cameras, I believe, in France and elsewhere, where they did use the 35 millimeter film and making that mechanism for film, for photography, not just for movies. But this really established the first motorized wind for a specific dedicated photography camera, and interestingly figuring out a very reliable mechanism that it still works today for that paper-backed large film format, allowing, as per their advertisement, to take 1 pictures per second. So imagine in 1924, when previously you had to mess around with winding film to the next frame, now you're able to take sport pictures at 1 frame per second, which is really remarkable. And I think it is indeed possible. So I've shot with this, and it's just very quick. Once you wind it up, the winding is good for maybe 4 or maybe even 5 shots still. And you do have to cock the shutter, take it, but you could do it all one-handed, while holding the camera, and then do everything, all the operation with your other hand, clicking this, cocking the shutter. Actually, the shutter doesn't need to be cocked. It's like a guillotine shutter. So it's basically, you click here and off you go. Remarkable, I think, for that to be 100 years ago, right? 1924 to 2024. So moving on, a couple years later to 1927, we have the Ansco Memo camera, which now used 35 millimeter film. And so it's an early 35 millimeter film camera, not the first by any means. And you could argue that it's maybe one of the first half frame cameras, but you need to consider, because indeed it doesn't take the current full frame width. It sort of, the film travels vertically through it, and then the shot is across, as you could kind of see in the back. However, at the time, that's how 35 millimeter film was used. In movie cameras, the film travels vertically and the shots are across. So it was kind of natural for the first usage of that for photography to do the same thing. So it's not really an invention. It's not really an invention for half frame camera, but it's an interesting aspect where today we keep arguing about full frame as being some sort of very unique format that is the optimal size that everybody should shoot with. And, it's kind of silly, because back in the day, full frame was actually half frame. And of course, there were all sorts of other sizes. This whole notion of full frame, I'll speak about it later when I get to digital cameras. But anyway, it's just something, it's a pretty neat camera from back in the day. It's kind of tiny. It has a film counter. So every time you, again, it's sort of a guillotine shutter where you no need to cock it, and still works, except for the fact that, fortunately, I don't have the back for it. It used cartridges because you didn't have that 35 millimeter canister that came later, didn't exist yet. So it had 2 cartridges, and it wound the film from one to the other, taking 50 shots on it from 1924. So finally, the last camera, and it's Ansco's pinnacle of camera manufacturing. So this is from 1947, but prior to 1947, Ansco entered into a business partnership with Agfa in the 1920s, I believe. And so they often rebranded basically Agfa manufactured cameras. And when World War II came about, the US banned the import of German cameras, and this led Ansco to again develop and manufacture cameras on their own. And what they actually decided to do is looking at this market opportunity. Right after World War II, you weren't able to get the best professional cameras that were manufactured in Germany. At that point, the twin lens reflex cameras were the norm for professional photography. And Rolleiflex, of course, was the manufacturer for this. And so US companies like Kodak started to come out with their own twin lens reflex cameras, but they were not anywhere near the quality that the German camera companies were. So Ansco decided to say, hey, it's an opportunity. Let us make the best twin lens reflex camera that America ever made. And that's exactly what they did. They hired a designer, Henry Dreyfus, who was also well known for designing the streamlined locomotives in the 1940s for the New York Central Railroad. And he's the one that used sort of the same industrial design. It is such a handsome camera with the stainless steel sort of cover on the front, which, by the way, so for the focusing, it's suspended on 4 points, and it has this mechanism for focusing, which makes it very precise. This doesn't, move at all. It was really well engineered. It wasn't a copy or a knockoff of a Rolleiflex. It was its own design. And it also took them a couple more years to release it. They announced it in 1945, released it in 1947, and it was a very expensive camera. So hence, it wasn't very successful. A lot of engineering went into it, and I don't think they ever made a dime on it, given the manufacturing costs. And unfortunately, it was only made for a short period of time. But I'll aim to cover this in the future, along with other twin lens reflex cameras. And I'm hoping to fix it, because at the moment, everything seems to work, but the shutter is sticky. And so I will have to figure out a way to disassemble it a little bit to lubricate it and get it back to working condition. So that's sort of Ansco in a nutshell. Based on the cameras I collected from them, I find it a fascinating company to collect. For one reason, because of this underdog status and the role they had in the history of photography, and because they're sort of overlooked. They weren't the most successful company in a sense. They kind of, struggled along, but came out with very unique, innovative cameras along the way. And as such, I think it makes it a great company to collect. So let me know your thoughts in the comments. For those, nothing against people collecting Kodak cameras. They made some amazing cameras as well. But let me know your thoughts on Ansco, because indeed it seems to be a company that's overlooked. And that's the reason I wanted to make this video. So please subscribe to then check out my subsequent episodes. This one will be next, covering this, and then we'll keep moving on onto the rest until we get to the digital era, covering film photography, as well as based on the ad hoc collection that I've put together. Thanks.